The room was silent when he stepped up to the microphone. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, but for a moment, just one trembling heartbeat. Prince William looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 years of history. His voice cracked as he began, and within minutes, the entire world knew something irreversible had happened. King Charles had decided to abdicate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And this time, the palace couldn't spin it, bury it, or delay it. The monarchy itself was breaking, but the question burning in everyone's mind was simple. Why now? What pushed Charles, a man who had waited more than 70 years to become king, to walk away from the very thing he had lived his whole life to achieve? And more importantly, why did William, in his raw, emotional speech, blame Meghan Markle and Prince Harry for the chaos that led to this decision? This wasn't just another royal scandal. It was the sound of the crown cracking in real time. People across the UK described the announcement as surreal. The BBC's broadcast had been interrupted, anchors visibly shaken. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #RoyalCrisis and #EndOfAnEra trended within minutes. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered with tears, confusion, and even anger. "Is this the end?" one woman whispered to a reporter outside the gates. But the real story wasn't just about abdication. It was about heartbreak, betrayal, and a family war that had finally gone too far. Because if you listened closely to William's voice that day, you could hear more than pain. You could hear resentment. He didn't say Harry's name directly. He didn't have to. Every pause, every tremble, every look skyward told the world exactly who he was referring to. And when he said, "My father deserved peace, not persecution," millions watching at home knew exactly what that meant. The cameras zoomed in on his face. Tight-lipped, pale, but resolute. It was the look of a man torn between duty and devastation. But let's rewind for a moment. Because to understand the explosion that happened that day, you have to see the slow burn that came before it. The hidden meetings, the rumors, the letters no one was supposed to read. Was this truly about Charles's health? Or was it about something darker? Because according to insiders, this wasn't a sudden abdication. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of internal conflict, emotional exhaustion, and humiliation brought on by two people who had turned their backs on the very institution that made them. Harry and Meghan. Let's go back to where this storm began. When Charles took the throne, the world expected a period of calm. After the passing of Queen Elizabeth, the nation mourned but also looked forward to stability. William stood firm beside his father, Kate by his side, the picture of continuity. But behind palace walls, things weren't as harmonious as they seemed. Reports began leaking of disagreements about modernization, about royal finances, about how much attention should be given to the Sussexes, who by then were living in California. Harry's interviews and Netflix projects had caused deep wounds. Every time the Sussexes spoke, another piece of the royal facade cracked. Words like racism, betrayal, and neglect echoed louder each time. And through it all, Charles tried to remain the peacekeeper. But peace, as it turns out, was impossible when the people warring shared his blood. William's patience was running out. He was furious that the monarchy, the very foundation of his future, was being reduced to a global spectacle. And Meghan, always polished, always camera-ready, was being painted as the victim, while the royal family looked like villains in their own story. So when Charles began showing signs of fatigue, missing engagements, delegating key responsibilities, and retreating from public life, people assumed it was age, but insiders claim it was heartbreak. His spirit was broken, one palace aide confided. He felt he'd lost both his sons, one to grief and one to ambition. And when Harry refused to attend a key royal event earlier this year, citing family tension, something inside Charles reportedly snapped. He began to speak more openly with William, private meetings behind closed doors at Clarence House, emotional phone calls late at night. It was in one of those conversations, sources say, that the king confessed he no longer had the strength to continue. He wanted peace. But what he didn't expect was for William to turn that confession into something much bigger, an awakening, and ultimately, a public reckoning. In the weeks leading up to the abdication, the signs were everywhere if you knew where to look. Charles canceled a long-planned state visit to Canada. Camilla appeared at several events alone. The king's physician was photographed entering Sandringham multiple times. And then, suddenly, the palace issued a no-comment statement in response to rumors of a royal transition. That phrase alone sent British tabloids into overdrive. Royal watchers began whispering about a date, an internal deadline allegedly chosen months in advance for Charles to step down gracefully. But the truth was anything but graceful. Because behind the scenes, a battle was raging, not between the king and parliament, not between the royals and the press, but between father and son. William wanted to restore the monarchy's image. Charles wanted to preserve its soul. And between them stood the ghosts of Diana and the wounds of Harry and Meghan's departure. So when the abdication date was finally set, William didn't see it as the end of an era. He saw it as the beginning of a reckoning. That's why, when he stepped onto that stage to deliver his speech, there was no royal script, no carefully crafted lines from PR advisors. Just a son speaking from a place of loss and anger. He began slowly. My father has given this nation his heart, but hearts can only take so much before they break. Every word carried the weight of generations. He paused, eyes glistening, before continuing. There are those who claim to speak of compassion, of progress, of healing. Yet their actions have only deepened the wounds they say they wish to heal. That was it, the line that broke the internet. Within seconds, social media erupted. Was he talking about Meghan and Harry? Was this the moment William finally said what the palace had been too polite to admit for years? People played the clip on repeat. Analysts dissected it frame by frame, tone by tone. Some said he looked heartbroken. Others said he looked furious. And then came the phrase that silenced even his critics. My father deserved peace, not persecution. That was the knife twist. That was the point where everyone knew. He wasn't holding back anymore. And he wasn't finished. William went on to speak about the values his mother instilled in him: service, humility, responsibility. He described her as the moral compass of our family, a line that instantly drew applause from the crowd. But the deeper message was clear. This was William reminding the world, and his brother, who had truly inherited Diana's legacy. By the time he ended the speech, the audience was on its feet. Yet the air was thick with sorrow. Because this wasn't a celebration of succession. It was a eulogy for a family torn apart by pride and pain. He closed with a haunting line. The crown must endure, even when hearts do not. The cameras cut, the applause faded, but the echoes of his words refused to die. News channels replayed it for hours. Commentators debated whether William had gone too far, or if he had finally said what the world needed to hear. And as the palace released its official confirmation of Charles's abdication, one detail went unnoticed by many. The date chosen fell on the anniversary of Diana's final charity appearance before her death. Coincidence? Or a deliberate tribute? Either way, the symbolism was undeniable. The reign of a father had ended. The era of a son had begun. But instead of peace, it began with heartbreak, accusation, and the shadow of a family that had once been untouchable. And as the world tried to process what it had just witnessed, one question lingered like smoke over the palace gates. If William's words were meant to heal the monarchy, why did they feel like a warning instead? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began quietly, too quietly for a palace so used to pomp and ceremony. No trumpets, no balcony wave, no smiling royals lined up for photographs. Instead, behind the tall, cold walls of Buckingham Palace, whispers traveled faster than the official announcement ever could. The abdication date had been set. At first, even seasoned royal correspondents refused to believe it. Not Charles, one insider told the Daily Mail. He waited his entire life for this. He would die before giving it up. But sometimes, the truth hides behind what people refuse to see. And this truth was brutal. King Charles III was stepping down, not because of his health alone, not because of age or obligation, but because the weight of his crown had been poisoned by years of public humiliation, family division, and relentless media storms. And deep down, William believed he knew exactly who to blame. The news broke at 5:42 a.m. London time. Palace phones started ringing like fire alarms. The BBC interrupted its morning program with an emergency broadcast. Across the Atlantic, American talk shows scrambled to confirm the story. And somewhere in California, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's phones began to light up too. Because everyone wanted to know, how much of this was their fault? Was this the moment the Sussex saga had gone too far? Let's rewind the clock 6 months before the announcement, the moment where everything started to fracture. At that time, Charles was already struggling. Doctors had quietly urged him to slow down, but slowing down was not in his vocabulary. Every day, he rose before dawn, attending meetings, signing papers, reviewing state briefs, hosting engagements. But while he tried to appear composed, those close to him described a man haunted by stress and disappointment. One aide described it best: he was fighting 2 wars, one with his health and one with his heart. Because while Charles was trying to modernize the monarchy, his family was tearing it apart. Harry's memoir had reignited wounds that were never healed. Meghan's public appearances, stylized, glamorous, and seemingly deliberate, kept drawing headlines that overshadowed the palace's official work. And each time the Sussexes appeared on another stage, another podcast, or another award gala, the tension inside the palace grew unbearable. To Charles, it was humiliation. To William, it was betrayal. Behind closed doors, the king confided to his closest advisers that he was deeply wounded by how far his youngest son had drifted. But it was William who saw the greater danger. Every time they speak, he reportedly said, they take a piece of the crown with them. The statement was dramatic, but not wrong. The monarchy, once untouchable, had become tabloid material. Every revelation, every exclusive, every truth bomb made the institution look less royal and more dysfunctional. And through it all, Charles remained silent. That silence, many say, was his undoing. William begged him to act, to draw a line, to make a public stand. But Charles refused, saying, "A father cannot condemn his own son." And yet, that same mercy was what made him vulnerable. The tabloids mocked his weakness. Political commentators questioned his authority. Even foreign diplomats whispered about his waning influence. He was the king of the United Kingdom, but inside his own family, he was powerless. That's when the meeting at Clarence House happened. According to multiple insiders, it was a Sunday evening, rainy, cold, and unusually tense. William had arrived unannounced, his face pale, his jaw tight. Camilla was there too, seated quietly with a cup of tea she never drank. Charles, visibly exhausted, tried to make small talk. But William cut him off. "This can't go on," he said. Those 5 words hung in the air like thunder. The argument that followed has become the stuff of royal legend. William, emotional but controlled, accused his father of letting the monarchy bleed out. Charles countered that forgiveness was the only way forward. But William wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for boundaries. "You've let them destroy everything," he reportedly said. "Every word they speak cuts deeper into this family." Charles, in turn, told him he refused to be the king who exiled his own son. But by then, William had already made up his mind. He didn't want to inherit a monarchy drowning in PR disasters and emotional baggage. He wanted to rebuild it, even if that meant breaking it first. 3 days later, the king canceled his next 3 public engagements for rest. But palace insiders say the real reason was emotional exhaustion. He had been shaken by the confrontation with his son. A week later, doctors advised a temporary retreat to Balmoral for recovery. But that retreat became a turning point. Alone with his thoughts, surrounded by memories of his mother, his siblings, and the heavy ghost of expectation, Charles made the decision no one expected. He would step down. The first person he told wasn't Camilla. It was William. The call came late at night. William was at Adelaide Cottage when his father's private line flashed on his screen. "I've made my decision," Charles said quietly. "The crown will be yours sooner than you think." For several seconds, William didn't respond. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. Charles sighed. A man must know when his reign has ended, even before the throne tells him. But those words, poetic as they sounded, masked something deeper: defeat. And William, though deeply moved, felt another emotion too: anger. Because in his mind, this wasn't destiny taking its course. It was the Sussexes, through years of scandal and self-promotion, wearing his father down until there was nothing left. Within days, the palace's senior advisors were informed. The official explanation would be personal health and a desire for tranquility. But internally, it was called Operation Crescent, a quiet, orderly transition of power. Only a handful of people knew the exact date. And yet, somehow, the whispers reached the press before they were meant to. That's when the chaos began. Headlines exploded across every British tabloid. King Charles to abdicate within months. Palace in crisis as monarch plans early exit. William prepares for the crown. Harry left out. Every outlet scrambled for quotes, and none were flattering. In one particularly scathing editorial, a columnist wrote, "This abdication is not a graceful retirement. It's surrender, forced by scandal, fatigue, and the ghost of Diana." Those words hit like a dagger, because deep down, that's what everyone was thinking but too afraid to say. For William, those headlines confirmed what he already believed, that his father's fall had been orchestrated not by illness or politics, but by years of emotional warfare waged by his own brother and sister-in-law. Still, he held his silence, at least for now, because even as rumors swirled, William was preparing for something much bigger, a speech that would not only define his father's legacy, but mark the beginning of his own. When the day finally came, it wasn't what anyone expected. No grand coronation, no celebration. Just a press room filled with tension, cameras, and the unmistakable sound of heartbreak. William's speech would be remembered not for its diplomacy, but for its honesty. It wasn't the speech of a prince, it was the confession of a son. He began softly. For every family, there comes a time when the torch must be passed. But sometimes, that passing comes sooner than anyone wishes. He paused, scanning the crowd, his eyes heavy with fatigue. And then his tone hardened. "There are those," he said slowly, "who speak of compassion while sowing division, who claim love, yet live for spotlight. My father carried this nation through storms they will never understand. He deserved peace, not persecution." The silence that followed was deafening. Those three final words, "not persecution," echoed across continents. The implication was clear. He was done pretending. No more polished PR smiles. No more avoidance of names. The world knew exactly who he was referring to, and William didn't care. This was his line in the sand. He would not let the crown fall victim to family chaos again. As he stepped down from the podium, the crowd rose in applause, but his face remained blank, because behind the applause was pain. The pain of watching his father surrender, his family fracture, and the legacy of his mother turned into a tabloid circus. William had just declared emotional war, not against his brother directly, but against everything Harry and Meghan represented. The monarchy would survive, but the family would never be the same. And while the public was still digesting the shock, a chilling detail emerged from inside the palace, something no one expected. Charles's abdication wasn't entirely voluntary. There had been pressure from Parliament, from advisors, and possibly from William himself. But the truth behind that pressure, and what it means for the royal family's future, was about to surface. And when it did, it would leave Britain reeling once again. Because the abdication date wasn't just a moment in royal history. It was a deadline for revenge. And what came after, no one saw coming. It was early morning at Balmoral Castle. The mist still clung to the Scottish hills like a heavy ghost, and inside the king's private study, the curtains were drawn tight. Only one faint lamp flickered, casting a lonely circle of light across his desk. And there sat King Charles III, hunched, pale, and utterly still. A letter lay open before him. It wasn't long, barely a page, but its words had broken him. The man who had once waited a lifetime to be king, who had endured scandal, divorce, ridicule, and public mockery, was now a man undone by something far more painful than politics or protocol. He was undone by his family. Behind that closed door, he read and reread the letter written in his own trembling hand, as if he still couldn't believe what he'd put to paper. "I have given what I can," it read, "but the heart can no longer bear what duty demands." It was the first draft of his abdication statement. He hadn't yet told the Prime Minister. He hadn't even told Camilla. Only one person knew. The person who had always stood at the center of this storm, watching it consume everything in its path. Prince William. But before we reach that phone call, let's step back to the night that changed everything for the monarchy, the night Charles finally broke. It had begun innocently enough. A private dinner at Clarence House with senior staff, the Queen Consort, and close family members. Wine flowed, polite laughter filled the air, and yet, underneath it all, tension buzzed like an invisible current. Because they all knew. They knew the king had been struggling. His health had been quietly deteriorating. His schedule had been reduced, engagements canceled. But it wasn't just the body giving up, it was the spirit. Those closest to Charles described his growing isolation. His two greatest allies, his sons, were gone in every way that mattered. William was distant, consumed by duty. Harry was gone, consumed by resentment. And for Charles, the silence between them was deafening. He felt surrounded, said one former palisade. Not by enemies, but by ghosts. Diana, the Queen, even Philip. Every portrait in the palace reminded him of what he had to live up to, and how far he'd fallen short. That night, as the laughter faded and the guests began to leave, William lingered behind. Camilla excused herself quietly, sensing that something was about to erupt. And it did. William's voice was calm, but sharp. "Father, this can't go on," he began. Charles looked up, weary. "What can't?" "The silence. The scandals. The humiliation." Charles sighed. "You mean Harry?" "I mean everything," William shot back. "Every time they open their mouths, the monarchy bleeds. And every time you refuse to act, we lose another piece of what the Queen built." Charles closed his eyes. "He's my son." William's response was quick, bitter. "So am I." Those three words hit like gunfire. The heir to the throne, the future king, standing before his father, not as a prince, but as a man whose loyalty had reached its breaking point. For years, William had watched his father absorb blow after blow, hoping that silence would restore dignity. But all it did was make the crown look weaker. And to William, weakness was the one thing the monarchy could never afford. He leaned forward, his tone cold but pleading. "If you don't protect this family, father, who will?" Charles turned away, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand. You can't fight blood." "Then maybe you shouldn't be the one wearing the crown," William muttered. The room fell silent. The words hung there, heavy, dangerous, irreversible. Charles stood, trembling. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I'm saying the truth," William replied. "Maybe it's time." Neither spoke for several seconds. The King of England stared at his eldest son, the man who would soon replace him, and for the first time, saw not the boy he raised, but the monarch he would never become. That was the night the decision was made, even if no one dared to admit it aloud. Within a week, Charles's staff noticed a change. The king grew quieter, more introspective. He spent long hours alone in his study, surrounded by piles of letters, some from citizens, some from world leaders, some from his sons. There was one in particular that he kept reading, a letter from Harry, sent months earlier. It was long, emotional, full of regret and justification. "You never protected me," Harry had written. "You protected the institution, not your children." To anyone else, it might have sounded like the cry of a wounded son. But to Charles, it felt like a curse. He couldn't escape it. The words followed him from Sandringham to Balmoral, echoing in every corridor, every sleepless night. So when the news of yet another Sussex media deal broke, a deal rumored to include private reflections on the royal transition, Charles's resolve snapped completely. He told his aides he was done. Done with the press. Done with the infighting. Done with pretending his family hadn't become a battlefield. That was the moment the letter on his desk began to take shape. But as much as Charles wanted peace, his decision would ignite the opposite. Because William, loyal, furious, and haunted by the thought of his mother's legacy being tarnished, didn't see this as his father's surrender. He saw it as the Sussex's victory. And that was something he could never forgive. When Charles finally made the call to William, it wasn't a formal conversation. It was quiet, sad, and heavy with subtext. "I've made my decision," Charles said simply. There was a long pause. "Are you certain?" William asked. "I am. I've spoken with the Prime Minister. The paperwork will be ready soon." William's breath caught. "And what of them?" "Them, Harry and Meghan." Charles hesitated. "They will always be part of this family." "No," William said coldly. "Not mine." There was a silence so long. Even the ticking of the clock felt intrusive. Finally, Charles murmured, "You sound like her." "Like who?" "Your mother." The phone line went quiet again. William closed his eyes. Then maybe she was right. Click. The call ended, but the damage didn't. By the time dawn broke over Balmoral, Charles had written the first line of his abdication statement. By noon, palace officials were already discussing logistics. And by the end of the week, the entire royal machine, the same one that had carried monarchs for centuries, was preparing for something it had not seen since Edward VIII. A king stepping down. But there was something different this time. Something darker. Because unlike Edward, Charles wasn't stepping down for love. He was stepping down out of heartbreak. When the official draft of his statement was completed, he handed it to his private secretary with a single instruction: make sure it's dignified. The secretary nodded, but couldn't help noticing the smudges of ink, places where the king's pen had hesitated, trembled, maybe even wept. That same evening, William was seen leaving Kensington Palace in an unmarked car. Cameras tried to catch him, but his team blocked every shot. Where he went that night remains a mystery, but one thing is certain: he didn't go to see his father. The next morning, an emergency briefing was held. Senior royals gathered. Advisors shuffled nervously. The date was confirmed. King Charles III would officially step down at the end of the year. The room was silent, except for one sound: William's chair creaking as he stood. Then so be it, he said flatly. But if they think they've won, they're wrong. He walked out without another word. That was the moment it became clear: the abdication wasn't just a royal transition. It was an emotional battlefield. The father stepping down for peace. The son stepping forward for war. And in the center of it all, two names hung like ghosts over the palace halls: Harry and Meghan. They weren't even in the country, yet somehow, every headline, every whisper, every decision led back to them. Was it guilt? Was it blame? Or was it something deeper? The need to find a villain in a tragedy that had no heroes left? Whatever it was, it fueled William's next move. Because even as Charles's team prepared for a quiet announcement, William was preparing for something louder. A speech that would not just mark the end of his father's reign, but expose the pain that had forced it. And in that speech, he would name no one, but everyone would know exactly who he meant. But before the world could hear those words, another royal figure would break their silence. And what she said would turn the entire abdication narrative on its head. Because the next voice to speak wasn't William's. It was Camilla's. And her confession would send shockwaves through the royal household like nothing before. The rain was pounding against the palace windows that night, like it was echoing the turmoil inside. Camilla sat in silence at the end of the long dining table, her tea untouched, eyes fixed on the door that Charles had walked through just minutes earlier. He'd gone to his study again. The same study where he'd spent countless nights since the confrontation with William. And now, everyone in the palace could feel it. Something was about to break. For days, Camilla had watched her husband unravel. The king who once spoke passionately about architecture, sustainability, and the future of Britain now sat for hours staring into space, lost in thought. Every so often, he would scribble notes on thick parchment, his handwriting trembling, as though he were trying to put a lifetime of regrets into words before it was too late. She had tried to comfort him. She had tried to keep the palace functioning, to remind him of duty, of legacy. But Charles no longer wanted reassurance. He wanted release. And when he finally called her back into the room that evening, she knew this wasn't going to be another discussion. It was going to be a reckoning. He handed her a folded page. "It's done," he said softly. Camilla opened it, her eyes scanning the familiar looping handwriting. "I can no longer serve with the heart this role demands. My greatest wish is for the monarchy to endure through stability and grace." Camilla looked up, speechless. "You're abdicating." Charles nodded, his expression distant. "It's what must be done. But the people, your people, Charles, they will see this as weakness." He sighed. "Let them. For once in my life, I must choose peace." The room was silent, except for the ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. And then, something shifted in Camilla's face, grief giving way to frustration. "This isn't about peace," she said, her voice trembling. "This is about them, isn't it? Meghan and Harry." Charles looked away. She continued, anger flaring in her tone. "You've spent years trying to forgive them, defending them, even when they humiliated this family in front of the entire world. And now, after all that, you want to give up the throne because of them." Charles didn't respond. He simply pressed a hand to his forehead and whispered, "I can't fight my own sons." Camilla's jaw tightened. "You're not fighting your sons. You're fighting for your crown." He shook his head. "I fought for the crown all my life, Camilla. And in the process, I lost my sons. What good is a throne if your family despises you?" The words hung in the air like lead. Camilla's expression softened, but only for a moment. Then she said what no one else had dared to say. If you step down, Charles, they win. The very people who tore this family apart will get to say they destroyed a king. For the first time, Charles's eyes met hers, pained, defiant. Then let them. Let them have their narrative. I'm tired of living for everyone else's version of me. Camilla's breath hitched. It wasn't just exhaustion in his voice. It was finality. She knew then that she couldn't stop him, and that terrified her. Because if Charles abdicated, she would lose more than a crown. She would lose the only man who had ever fought to keep her in his life. She turned away, hiding the tears welling in her eyes. Then you must let William speak first, she whispered. Let him carry the fire while you carry the grace. The world will believe you are stepping down with dignity, not defeat. Charles didn't answer, but his silence said everything. That was the night Camilla decided to act. The following morning, while the palace still slept, she picked up her private phone and made a call to one of her most trusted allies in the royal communications team. Her voice was calm, but her message was explosive. Leak it. The aide hesitated. Leak what, Your Majesty? The truth, she said coldly. The king has decided to step down. But make sure they know why. The aide froze. You want to blame the Sussexes? Camilla's tone didn't waver. I don't need to. The truth will do that on its own. Within hours, whispers spread across newsrooms. Anonymous, royal sources began hinting that Charles's abdication was connected to emotional strain caused by family division. By the afternoon, it was everywhere. Charles forced to abdicate amid Sussex tension. Royal family imploding. Meghan and Harry blamed for King's exit. The damage was instant and irreversible. When William saw the first headline flash across his phone, he knew exactly who was behind it. And instead of fury, he felt something else, a grim satisfaction. Because finally, the world was seeing what he had been living through for years. That night, while Charles remained secluded in Balmoral, William and Kate sat together at their residence, watching the coverage in silence. Kate reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. He was lost in thought. This was always going to happen, she said softly. He's tired. I know, William replied. But it shouldn't have been this way. Not because of them. Kate looked down. He blames himself, you know. William's jaw tightened. He should. She turned to him sharply. William. He interrupted, his voice low but intense. If he had stood up to them years ago, if he had stopped the interviews, the leaks, the books, maybe he wouldn't be here now. Maybe he'd still be king, and we wouldn't be standing in the ruins of our own family. Kate didn't argue, because deep down, she knew he was right. For William, this wasn't just about royal politics. It was personal. Every scandal, every Netflix episode, every carefully curated California photo shoot felt like a dagger aimed at the heart of the family he was born to protect. He'd watched the public turn against the monarchy. He'd watched sympathy shift toward Meghan's narrative. And worst of all, he'd watched his father crumble under the weight of it all. Now, with the abdication confirmed, something inside William hardened. He would not let his reign begin under the shadow of shame. The world might see his father's exit as tragic, but William would make sure his speech turned it into a statement. A line in history, one that said, the monarchy survives. The chaos ends here. And though Charles didn't know it yet, William's upcoming address wasn't just about duty. It was about accountability. Because in William's eyes, forgiveness had failed. And it was time to make the truth public, no matter how painful. Meanwhile, Camilla watched the chaos unfold from the Queen's private apartments. Her phone buzzed constantly, journalists, friends, even former aides asking for comment. She ignored them all. Her face was expressionless, but her hands trembled. She had done what she thought was right. She had protected the monarchy by exposing the wound. But deep down, she knew Charles would see it differently. When he returned to London and saw the front pages, his reaction was swift. You told them, he said quietly. Camilla didn't deny it. They would have found out anyway. His voice broke. You turned my farewell into a spectacle. I turned it into a shield, she replied. Before they turned it into an embarrassment. For a long time, Charles said nothing. Then he whispered, You've destroyed what little peace I had left. Camilla's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Because she knew, whatever love they had, whatever battles they'd fought together, it was over now. The king was gone. The queen was alone. and the monarchy was preparing for its most emotional transfer of power since the abdication of Edward VIII. But there was still one thing left to happen, one voice that hadn't yet been heard: Prince William. And when he spoke, his words would not just mark the end of his father's reign. They would ignite a storm that would redefine the royal family forever. Because his speech wouldn't be about coronation, it would be about vengeance cloaked in dignity. And before he finished, he would utter one line that would make history tremble. But before that day arrived, something else surfaced. Something buried. A letter, written not by Charles, but by Diana. And when its contents became known, everything, William's fury, Charles's surrender, and Meghan's defiance, would suddenly make chilling sense. Because it seemed that, even from beyond the grave, Diana had seen this coming. It was a storm unlike any other, not of thunder and lightning, but of whispers, headlines, and heartbreak. London hadn't seen such frenzy since the passing of Princess Diana herself. Cameras were stationed outside every royal residence. News anchors wore somber expressions as they repeated the same headline over and over. The king is stepping down. The monarchy faces its reckoning. But as the nation reeled from Charles's decision, another story began to rise from the ashes. One that would grip the world by the throat. Because in the quiet corners of the palace, sealed in a velvet folder tucked behind glass, lay a letter written more than 25 years ago. A letter from Diana, one that no one outside her family was ever meant to see. And somehow, against every royal protocol and every wall of secrecy, that letter had resurfaced. It began innocently. An archivist from Kensington Palace had been tasked with preparing an exhibit in honor of William's upcoming accession. Among the memorabilia, photo albums, handwritten notes, charity awards, she found a small white envelope marked only with one word in Diana's handwriting. For William. The ink had faded slightly, but her cursive was unmistakable. Delicate, elegant, heartbreaking. The archivist hesitated. She wasn't authorized to open private royal correspondence. But the envelope had been misfiled under personal items, cleared for archive. It had technically been approved. Her curiosity won. Inside was a single folded page, written in Diana's signature blue ink. And what it said would send ripples through the monarchy's already cracking foundation. My darling boy, if you are reading this, then you are facing the weight of something far bigger than yourself. Perhaps even bigger than the crown itself. You will have to choose one day between family and duty. And I fear that choice will break your heart. Remember, truth without kindness is cruelty, and kindness without truth is weakness. Never let them silence your heart, but never let anger rule your voice. The people will love you not because you are royal, but because you are real. Love always. Mummy. The archivist froze, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just the beauty of the words, it was the timing. Here was Diana, long before her son's feud, long before Meghan, long before the abdication, seemingly predicting the very storm that had now engulfed them. Word spread quickly among the staff. Within hours, the letter reached a senior aide, who then forwarded it to Kensington Palace, and directly to Prince William. He read it in silence, standing by the window of his study, the city lights of London glinting off the glass. Kate stood behind him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "What does it say?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. When he finally turned, his voice trembled. "It says she knew this would happen. All of it." Kate frowned. "What do you mean?" William looked down at the letter again, his eyes tracing every word. "She knew I'd be forced to choose between family and duty." He paused. "And she knew that choice would destroy me." Kate's eyes softened. "It doesn't have to." He gave a bitter half-smile. "It already has." He placed the letter gently on his desk. "I've chosen duty, Kate, and I won't apologize for it." But even as he said it, a flicker of conflict crossed his face. Because deep down, he wasn't sure if he was following his mother's wisdom or betraying it. That letter changed everything. When palace insiders got wind of its contents, the press frenzy intensified. Diana's prophetic letter discovered screamed the headlines. William torn between his mother's words and his father's legacy. Suddenly, the abdication was no longer just a constitutional event. It was a Shakespearean tragedy, a family curse playing out across generations. The timing couldn't have been worse. William's speech was only days away, and now, the ghost of his mother hovered over every word he was about to say. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan and Harry were blindsided by the storm. They woke up in Montecito to see Diana's face plastered across every news channel, her words quoted, her handwriting dissected by experts. Harry stared at the TV in disbelief. "Why are they doing this now?" he muttered. Meghan scrolled through her phone, her tone clipped. "Because they want to make you the villain in your mother's story." Harry ran a hand through his hair. "She wrote that for both of us." Meghan looked at him sharply. "No, Harry. She wrote that for William. They'll make it about him, because that's what sells. The golden sun torn between crown and conscience." Harry didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on the television, where an old photo of Diana holding him and William as children flashed across the screen. He remembered her voice, her laugh, her warmth, and the chaos that followed her death. And now, it was happening again. Different players. Same tragedy. For the first time in months, Harry reached for his phone and dialed his brother's private number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. "William, it's me," he said quietly. "I know things are bad. I know you're angry. But please don't turn this into something it isn't." She wouldn't have wanted that. He hesitated. "Call me back, will you?" But William never called. Back in London, William's inner circle debated how to handle the letter publicly. Should it be acknowledged? Quoted? Referenced subtly? One aide warned, "If you mention Diana's letter, the speech becomes personal, emotional. It shifts from monarchy to family." William's reply was sharp. That's exactly the point. He wasn't just stepping into his father's role as king. He was stepping into his mother's shadow, the woman who embodied empathy, vulnerability, and truth. And now, he was about to use her final words to rewrite the monarchy's future. Kate could sense what this meant. On the night before the speech, she found him pacing the hallway, rehearsing under his breath. "You can't let anger guide you," she said gently. "Remember what she wrote." He stopped, eyes filled with pain. "I'm not angry. I'm heartbroken." She touched his hand. "Then speak from that." He nodded slowly, staring out the window at the palace courtyard, where workers were already setting up for the historic announcement. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "the monarchy changes forever." The next day dawned gray and solemn. The press gathered in a frenzy. Global networks went live hours before the official start. When William finally stepped out onto the platform, dressed in a dark navy suit with his late mother's sapphire cufflinks glinting under the lights, the crowd fell silent. Every camera zoomed in. Every heartbeat seemed to stop. Behind him, the royal standard hung half-lowered, symbolic of transition, but to many, it felt like mourning. William took a breath and began. "My father has served this nation with dignity, grace, and love. His decision to step aside comes not from weakness, but wisdom." The crowd listened intently. But then his tone shifted, softer, sadder. "In moments of change, we are called to reflect on what binds us together and what has broken us apart. Families falter, hearts fracture, yet the call to serve endures." He paused, his gaze steady. "My mother once wrote that truth without kindness is cruelty, and kindness without truth is weakness. I have carried those words all my life." Gasps rippled through the audience. He had done it. He had invoked Diana. He continued, voice tightening. "We cannot heal what we refuse to face. My family has faced trials, some within, some without. But we must not mistake silence for peace. Peace requires truth." Every reporter knew exactly what he was saying. It was a message not just to the nation, but to Harry and Meghan. And yet, there was pain in every syllable. "This institution," he said, "has survived wars, losses, and scandals. But today, it survives something far greater, the choice to begin again." His voice wavered slightly. "The monarchy must not be a mirror of perfection. It must be a mirror of humanity." Tears welled in the eyes of many watching. By the time William finished, there was no applause. Just silence, heavy, sacred, unforgettable. He had spoken not as a prince or a politician, but as a son who had finally faced his ghosts. But even as the world praised his courage, a darker truth was waiting to emerge. Because Diana's letter, the one that had seemed so innocent, so pure, wasn't the only one she had written. There was another, one meant for Charles, and when it surfaced, it would shatter what little peace remained and expose secrets the royal family had kept buried for decades. It began with a whisper in the corridors of Clarence House. A staff member, pale and trembling, handed a sealed brown envelope to one of the senior royal aides. "It came from the archives," she stammered. "They said there was another one." The aide didn't ask questions. He knew what she meant. The second letter. It had been rumored for years. A private note Princess Diana had written to King Charles after their separation, but before the tragic crash that took her life. The palace had always denied its existence. "No such document is in our possession," they'd said countless times. But now, in the middle of the greatest royal crisis since Edward VIII's abdication, the letter had reappeared, and its timing could not have been more catastrophic. The discovery came less than 48 hours after William's historic speech. The world was still reeling, the press calling it the most human moment in royal history. His words were being dissected in schools, on talk shows, even in Parliament. But what no one expected was that the ghost of Diana, the mother who had inspired William's courage, was about to haunt the monarchy once more. The letter was handed directly to the new private secretary, who stared at it as if it were radioactive. It was addressed to "My dear Charles," written in Diana's looping, unmistakable script. The seal, faded and brittle, had the faint imprint of her old Kensington Palace stationery. He carried it straight to William. When William saw it, his chest tightened. "Is this what I think it is?" "Yes, Your Royal Highness," the aide said cautiously. "It was found among Diana's personal effects. We thought it best that you see it first." William hesitated for a moment, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. A lump rose in his throat. "I'll read it," he said quietly. Kate was in the room with him, sitting near the fireplace, her face pale. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I need to know." He broke the seal. The paper inside was thin, delicate, the kind that could crumble if handled too roughly. He unfolded it carefully. The words were simple, but devastating. "My dear Charles, by the time you read this, perhaps we will have stopped pretending. We've both tried to carry the image of something long broken. But duty without love is a prison, and I fear you have built your walls so high, you no longer see the people you rule. The crown gives, but it also takes your laughter, your warmth, your soul. I fear it will one day take your sons, too. And when it does, I pray you will let them go with grace, not guilt. Please, for their sake, be a father first, a monarch second. Love, Diana." When William finished reading, the silence was deafening. Kate's voice broke at first. "She saw it all, didn't she?" He nodded slowly, staring at the letter as if it were a prophecy. Every word. She knew exactly what this family would become. He sat down, his head in his hands. She warned him. She told him what would happen if he put the crown above us. Kate leaned forward gently. "You can't blame him for everything, William." He looked up sharply. "Can't I?" She begged him to be a father first. And he couldn't even do that. He stood and walked to the window, the weight of 2 generations pressing on his shoulders. "Do you realize what this means?" he said softly. "If this gets out, they'll say my father ignored her dying wish. They'll say she predicted this abdication. And they'll be right." Kate didn't respond, because she knew he wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, in Balmoral, Charles was unaware of the storm brewing. For the first time in months, he'd slept through the night. The abdication date was set, his farewell statement finalized. For once, he felt free. Until the phone rang. It was his private secretary, voice tight and formal. "Your Majesty, there's something you should see." When Charles arrived in London, the letter was waiting for him on his desk. He recognized Diana's handwriting instantly. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. He read it once, then twice, then a third time. By the end, his eyes glistened. Camilla entered quietly. "What is it?" He handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her face growing paler with every line. "She wrote this all those years ago?" He nodded. "Yes." She looked at him carefully. "And you never saw it?" "No." He sank into his chair, voice barely audible. She was right. Camilla frowned. "About what?" "Everything. About duty. About the crown taking too much. About losing my sons." He pressed his palms together. "It's like she's still here, watching." Camilla placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't let this consume you, Charles." But it already had. For years, he had fought to prove he could rule differently, more gently, more compassionately than his predecessors. But in that moment, all he could see was a man who had failed everyone he loved. His wife, his sons, his people. And when the press got hold of the story, because they always did, the narrative shifted overnight. Diana's warning ignored. Letter from the past exposes the king's regret. Prophecy fulfilled. Diana predicted Charles's fall. Royal curse continues. The ghost that won't let go. Suddenly, William's speech was no longer the headline. It was the letter, and the tragedy that had once defined Diana now defined her son's ascension. In Montecito, Harry stared at the letter's contents on his phone, leaked word for word online by the tabloids. Meghan watched him silently as his expression changed from disbelief to sorrow. She warned him, Harry whispered. She told him what would happen. Meghan sighed. She warned all of them. Harry's voice was quiet but sharp. No, Meg. She warned him about us. She knew the crown would take us, too. He tossed his phone aside, his jaw tightening. They'll twist this, like they twist everything. They'll say she predicted his fall, not what we went through. Meghan looked away. Maybe she did. Harry's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? She hesitated. Maybe your mother saw what this family would do to anyone who didn't fit their mold. Maybe she was warning all of them, including me. Harry stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. This isn't about you, Meghan. The silence that followed was long and sharp. Finally, Meghan said softly, It's always about me to them, Harry. It's always about me. He didn't answer, because she was right. Back in London, William was preparing for a follow-up address. Advisors begged him not to mention the letter. It'll open old wounds, they warned. But William wasn't interested in damage control anymore. This family has lived in shadows for too long, he said, his tone steady. I won't hide behind silence. He decided to read part of the letter during his next public appearance, a memorial event at Kensington Palace Gardens. The same gardens where his mother once walked barefoot among the flowers she loved. The morning of the event was clear and cold. A light breeze carried the faint scent of roses through the air. William stood at the podium, the letter in his hand. My mother once wrote these words to my father, he began. She said, The crown gives, but it also takes, your laughter, your warmth, your soul. I fear it will one day take your sons too. He paused. The crowd was utterly still. I believe she was right. The crown took much from her, from my father, and from my brother. But I also believe it can give back. It can give hope. It can give service. It can give humanity. There was a tremor in his voice as he folded the letter. I will not let her words be a curse. I will make them a promise. Applause erupted, thunderous, emotional, unrestrained. But behind the applause, the storm was brewing once more. Because while the world hailed William as the people's king, another revelation was quietly preparing to explode. A private journal, a sealed document, and a confession written by King Charles himself. A confession that would reveal the real reason he chose to abdicate. And once it surfaced, it would change the legacy of both Diana and the monarchy forever. The day had arrived. The day the world would hear Prince William speak in a way no royal had dared before. Cameras lined the courtyard outside Kensington Palace, reporters murmuring into microphones, satellites beaming live feeds to every corner of the globe. People gathered quietly, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation. Somewhere in the crowd, older women clutched their hats, children stared wide-eyed, and journalists whispered, This isn't just a speech. This is history. Inside the palace, William paced in his study, a copy of his notes in hand. Kate stood nearby, her posture calm but her eyes alert, sensing every tremor in his body. He was nervous, but not like any nerves before. This was not the fear of making a mistake or forgetting a line. No, this was the fear of being too real, of allowing the world to see the heartbreak, anger, and love all tangled together inside him. Do you want to rehearse again? Kate asked softly. He shook his head. No, I need to speak, not recite. She nodded, understanding. She knew he carried his mother's legacy on his shoulders, but also his own judgment. Every word had to balance history, emotion, and consequence. One wrong phrase, one slip, and the narrative of his father, of Diana, of Harry and Meghan would spin beyond his control. Outside, the crowd grew restless. The sun had begun to dip, casting long shadows across the palace walls. Cameramen jockeyed for position, their lenses trained on the balcony that would soon hold William. News tickers flashed on screens. Prince William prepares historic address amid abdication fallout. Public awaits emotional speech. Is this the beginning of the people's king? Inside the press room, advisors whispered urgently, "Remember, emphasize continuity, respect the monarchy, but remain firm." This is a line in the sand. But William had already decided. This was not going to be a speech for image alone. It was going to be a statement of truth, a reckoning, and, at the same time, a tribute to those who had been lost or silenced along the way. He adjusted the notes in his hand and breathed deeply. Each inhalation carried years of grief, anger, and responsibility. Each exhale was the promise that he would finally speak from his heart. As he stepped onto the balcony, the crowd erupted, but William held up a hand. The applause softened to murmurs, anticipation humming through the air like static electricity. He began slowly. "My father has served this nation with honor and with devotion. His reign, though challenging, has been a testament to perseverance and duty." The words were measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. But then, William's tone shifted, the first tremor of raw emotion entering his voice. But even the strongest hearts can be broken. Even the most steadfast hands can be weighed down by burdens unseen. A gasp swept through the audience. Television anchors paused mid-sentence. Social media notifications exploded, viewers across the world instantly sensing the change in tone, the subtle shift from formality to intimacy. William continued, his gaze scanning the crowd. "There are those who speak of compassion and loyalty, yet their actions bring discord. Words can heal, but silence can wound just as deeply." The pause that followed was nearly unbearable. He let the words settle. The press was scribbling furiously. Cameras zoomed closer. Even birds seemed to fall silent, as if nature itself were waiting for his next phrase. "And sometimes," he added, voice tight with restraint, "we are forced to make choices between family and duty. Choices that break our hearts, that weigh on our souls, and yet are necessary for the greater good." Here, for a brief moment, he faltered. His eyes glistened as he looked skyward. Kate reached out, squeezing his hand. He drew strength from her touch and pressed forward. "My mother once wrote to my father, words I have carried all my life, that duty without love is a prison. Truth without kindness is cruelty, and kindness without truth is weakness. These words have guided me, inspired me, and reminded me of what truly matters." He lifted a single folded letter, just enough for the cameras to capture it. The audience recognized the handwriting instantly, Diana's. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. William's voice grew stronger, deliberate, every syllable carrying both reverence and warning. "I have seen the pain caused when loyalty is betrayed. I have witnessed the cost of silence and the weight of secrecy. The crown endures, yes, but hearts are fragile, and family is sacred." The camera panned to the crowd. Some were crying openly. Others whispered to neighbors. A few journalists, normally stone-faced, looked shaken. Social media began trending instantly. Hashtag William's speech, hashtag Diana's legacy, hashtag royal truths, hashtag monarchy reckoning. He paused. The moment was electric. Then came the line that would instantly define the day. "My father deserved peace, not persecution." Silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every journalist, every viewer, understood the weight of that statement. It wasn't just a comment on the past, it was a verdict. And though he did not speak the names, everyone knew. Harry, Meghan, the shadow of decades of conflict compressed into those 4 words. Then, without hesitation, he shifted back to reassurance and leadership, grounding the moment in hope. This institution has faced trials, losses, and public scrutiny. It has survived because we have endured. Today, it survives because we choose to honor it, to serve it, and to protect it for future generations. He folded the letter, returning it to his pocket. His eyes scanned the crowd once more, this time softer, almost vulnerable. And though this moment is tinged with sorrow, it is also a beginning. A promise that the monarchy will not merely exist, but will serve. Not as a symbol of power alone, but as a reflection of humanity, resilience, and compassion. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some weeping openly. But for William, the noise was background. His thoughts were with his father, his brother, his mother, and the weight of every choice that had led him to this moment. He stepped away from the podium and into the palace, not as a prince, but as a son who had carried his family's legacy, confronted its pain, and spoken its truth. The press would replay his speech thousands of times. Analysts would debate the tone, the pauses, the implications. Historians would dissect every line for meaning. Social media would erupt with commentary, memes, and viral clips. But behind all the spectacle, one truth remained unspoken, one that William would carry with him in private. The crown could survive this. The monarchy could survive this. But the family? That was still in ruins. And even as he walked into the palace, William could feel the first tremors of what was coming next. Because while the speech had delivered clarity to the public, a far more private, far more explosive truth was waiting. One that would reveal the full extent of Charles's abdication, the lingering shadow of Diana, and the decisions that had forced William's hand. A secret document. Sealed, unspoken, and capable of shattering everything the world thought it knew about the royal family. The palace had barely returned to its usual rhythm after William's speech when another revelation dropped like a thunderclap.